Alien girl promised to warm his bed through the winter, but her heart melted first. The wind screamed against the wooden walls of the cabin, carrying with it the sharp bite of ice and snow. Jack sat by the fire, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his rough hands outstretched toward the flames. Sparks leapt now and then, but they did little to chase away the vast loneliness that pressed in from every side. Outside, the wilderness stretched for miles, forests buried under snow, rivers frozen solid, and mountains that pierced the sky like jagged teeth. Jack had chosen this life years ago, when the world beyond had grown too crowded, too loud, too full of disappointments. Here there was silence. Here, there was no one to ask questions, no one to break promises, no one to remind him of what he had lost. But tonight, even the silence felt heavy. The storm had arrived suddenly at dusk, a wall of white sweeping across the valley, rattling his shutters and sealing him deeper into his isolation. He had weathered storms before, but this one felt different, angrier, hungrier. The walls of the cabin shuddered as though unseen hands pressed against them, testing for weakness. Jack glanced at the clock on the mantel. Midnight. The fire crackled, the storm howled, and he sat alone with nothing but his thoughts for company. He rubbed his beard, thick and flecked with gray, and leaned back into his chair, letting the warmth soak into his bones. And then 3 sharp knocks at the door. The sound cut through the storm like a blade. Jack froze. No one came this deep into the wilderness. He had not seen another soul in months, maybe longer. The nearest settlement was 2 days' trek through frozen forests and mountain trails. Whoever was out there had no business being here. Another knock. Urgent. Harder this time. Jack stood slowly, his hand drifting toward the rifle propped against the wall. He gripped it firmly as he moved to the door. The old wood creaked beneath his boots, and his heart pounded against his ribs. He told himself it was just the storm playing tricks, a branch blown loose, maybe a fallen tree. But no, he had heard it clearly. Knuckles against wood. He stopped in front of the door. The cold seeped through the cracks, brushing against his skin like icy fingers. The third knock came, softer now, but filled with desperation. Jack lifted the latch. For a long moment he hesitated, listening to the storm shrieking outside, listening to his own breath. Then, with a steady pull, he opened the door. Snow blew in immediately, stinging his face, blinding him. And standing there, half buried in white, was a figure. She swayed on unsteady legs, wrapped in torn furs that clung to her curvy form. Her long black hair was tangled and heavy with frost. Her skin, even in the firelight spilling through the doorway, shimmered faintly blue, almost glowing against the night. And her eyes, silver, luminous, wide with fear, locked onto his. For a moment, Jack thought the storm had conjured her, some spirit from the wilderness come to haunt him. But she was real. He could see her breath clouding in the air, hear the faint rasp of her lungs fighting the cold. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice carrying both exhaustion and urgency. "If you let me stay," she whispered, "I will keep your bed warm through the winter." Jack's grip on the rifle tightened. His instincts screamed at him to slam the door, to push the stranger back into the night. She was alien, not human. He could see it in her skin, her eyes, the way she seemed to belong to another world entirely. And yet, the storm howled behind her, a merciless force that would swallow her whole if he turned her away. And in her eyes, beneath the fear, he saw something he recognized. Loneliness. The same loneliness that gnawed at him every night in this cabin. The fire cracked behind him. The cold pressed forward. Jack stood caught between 2 choices. Finally, he lowered the rifle. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said. She staggered past him, her body shivering violently, her torn furs dripping snow onto the wooden floor. Jack shut the door against the storm, sealing them both inside the fragile cocoon of warmth and firelight. And just like that, the silence of his solitary world was broken. The fire snapped and hissed as Jack threw another log into the flames. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the chill that clung to the stranger like a second skin. She sat on the rug before the hearth, her furs steaming as the snow melted away. Her hands were slender, her fingers trembling as she reached toward the fire, silver eyes reflecting the glow. Jack leaned against the wall, the rifle still close at hand. He studied her carefully, his instincts balanced between suspicion and a strange pull he could not quite name. She was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her skin was smooth, blue like polished stone, yet alive with faint patterns that shifted when the firelight touched her. Her lips were full, cracked from the cold, but even then they carried a softness that felt oddly fragile. She noticed him staring. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the only sound the storm raging outside and the fire breathing inside. Then she lowered her eyes, as though ashamed, and pulled the torn fur tighter around herself. "You should not have opened the door," she said quietly, her voice hoarse but melodic. "It would have been safer for you." Jack frowned. "What are you running from?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she turned her face toward the flames, as though searching for courage in their restless dance. "It does not matter," she whispered. "I will not stay long. Only the winter. Only until the ice breaks. Then I will be gone, and you will forget I was ever here." Her words echoed in the cabin, heavy with promise and fear. Jack felt the tension in her tone, the weight of secrets left unspoken. Yet there was also the memory of her plea at the door, words that had unsettled him more than the storm. "If you let me stay, I will keep your bed warm through the winter." He cleared his throat, pushing the thought away. "I do not take strangers lightly, especially not ones who appear at my door in the middle of a storm." Her silver eyes lifted, locking with his. There was a spark there, sharp and unyielding, though her body shook with exhaustion. "Then think of me not as a stranger," she said, "but as a debt you will be repaid for. You gave me life when I had none left. In return, I give you warmth." Jack almost laughed, but the sound died in his chest. He had lived in solitude for so long that the very idea of another presence under his roof felt dangerous. And yet, he could not deny the truth in her trembling frame. Without him, she would have died in the snow. He sighed heavily and set the rifle aside, though still within reach. "What is your name?" She hesitated as if names carried power. Finally, she whispered, "Celine." The name lingered in the air like the faint echo of music. Jack rolled it silently in his mind, testing its weight. It suited her, mysterious and fragile, but also strong enough to endure the storm. "Fine," he said at last, his voice low. "You can stay. But understand this. My cabin is small, and my life is not easy. You will work for your keep. I do not give shelter for free." Celine lowered her head in acknowledgement. "I will work. I will clean. I will cook. And at night, I will keep you warm." Her last words caught him again, unsettling something deep inside him. He looked away, busying himself with the kettle, pouring water into a pot to make tea. He told himself he would not think about it, not now. He had taken her in because it was the right thing to do, nothing more. But as he glanced back at her, her silver eyes half closed, her lips pressed together as if holding back pain, he felt the smallest crack open in the wall he had built around himself. Outside, the storm roared with fury. Inside, the fire whispered. Shadows danced across the walls, and two souls who had no reason to trust each other found themselves bound by necessity. Jack placed a cup of steaming tea before her. She lifted it slowly, her hands brushing against his for the briefest instant. Warmth passed between them, not from the fire, not from the tea, but from something deeper. And though neither of them spoke of it, both felt the beginning of something they could not yet name. The days that followed settled into a fragile rhythm. The storm did not ease. Snow piled against the cabin walls, swallowing the forest in a blanket of white so deep that even the trees seemed to bow beneath its weight. Jack had lived through winters like this before, but never with someone else beside him. At first, the silence between them was heavy. Jack worked as he always had, splitting wood in the mornings, melting snow for water, checking the traps he had set days earlier. Celine stayed inside, still weak from her journey, wrapping herself in the warmth of the fire. When he returned, her silver eyes followed him quietly, as though she was measuring his every movement, trying to decide if she could trust him. She said little. He said even less. But slowly, the cabin began to feel different. One evening, when Jack carried in a rabbit from the traps, Celine rose to her feet. "Let me cook it," she offered. Her voice was soft but steady, and for the first time, it carried a note of purpose rather than desperation. Jack hesitated. Cooking had always been his chore, simple and mechanical. But he handed her the knife and watched as she cleaned the rabbit with surprising skill. Her hands were delicate, but steady, and when she placed the meat into the pot, she added herbs from a pouch hidden deep within her furs. The smell that filled the cabin was unlike anything Jack had known. Warm, rich, touched with spices he could not name. When he tasted it, the flavor was bold yet comforting, and for the first time in years, he found himself smiling. Celine saw it, and though she tried to hide it, a small laugh escaped her lips. That laugh broke something between them. From then on, they shared more than silence. Celine began to tell stories as they ate, stories of stars Jack had never seen and worlds he could only imagine. She spoke of mountains that glowed with crystal veins, oceans where silver fish leapt high enough to touch the moons, and cities built into the trunks of living trees that sang in the wind. Jack listened, sometimes with suspicion, sometimes with wonder. He had never been beyond this wilderness, never wanted to. Yet her words painted pictures so vivid that even the walls of his cabin seemed to open. In return, he told her little pieces of himself. He spoke of hunting trips with his father, of the river where he had learned to fish, of the scar on his hand from a drunken bet gone wrong. They were not grand tales, but Celine listened as though every detail mattered. At night, when the storm rattled the shutters and the cold pressed against the cabin like an uninvited guest, they lay beside each other. At first, there was distance between them, the space of mistrust and caution. But night after night, the distance grew smaller. She would shift closer, her warmth seeping into him, and he, though stubborn at first, began to welcome it. One night, as the fire burned low, Jack turned slightly and found her watching him. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the dark, soft and unguarded. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "You live like a ghost." Jack frowned. "A ghost? You haunt your own life," she said gently. "You breathe, you eat, you survive. But you do not live." The words stung, but not because they were cruel. They were true. He had buried himself in solitude, thinking it was strength. Now, with her beside him, he saw it for what it was. A cage. He did not answer, but Celine reached out and placed her hand lightly against his chest. "The fire inside you is not gone," she whispered. "It only needed someone to sit beside it again." Her touch lingered, and Jack felt the walls he had built over years begin to weaken. The winter pressed on, but it no longer felt endless. Days were marked by shared meals, small smiles, the sound of her laughter softening the edges of his solitude. Nights were marked by her presence beside him, her promise of warmth fulfilled not by obligation, but by choice. For the first time in many years, Jack did not dread the silence. He found himself listening for her voice, waiting for her laughter, watching the way the firelight touched her blue skin. What had begun as a pact of survival was becoming something else. Something neither of them dared to name, but both of them felt growing quietly, like the first shoots of spring hidden beneath the snow. The snow began to ease as winter dragged on, though the nights were still long and bitter. The forest outside remained buried, silent beneath its frozen shroud. Jack had grown used to the rhythm of his days with Celine, the quiet talks, the shared work, the laughter that now came more freely. For the first time in years, his cabin felt alive. But that peace did not last. It began with the tracks. Jack noticed them one morning as he checked the traps along the ridge. Large prints, deep in the snow, nothing like the marks left by deer or wolves. They were too heavy, too deliberate. Whoever had made them was moving with purpose, and the prints led dangerously close to his cabin. Jack crouched by the tracks, his breath steaming in the cold air. The prints were not alone, there were several sets, maybe 3, maybe 4. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Someone was out here, and they were not hunters from the settlements. He would have known if they were. When he returned to the cabin, Celine was stirring a pot over the fire. She looked up, her silver eyes bright with warmth that dimmed when she saw the look on his face. "What is it?" she asked. Jack set the rifle against the wall, his jaw tight. "Tracks, fresh ones. Too close to hear." Celine's hands stilled. For the briefest moment, fear flashed across her face before she smoothed it away. "What kind of tracks?" "Not animals," Jack said. "Men. Armed by the look of it." They were moving carefully. He studied her, noticing the way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers tightened around the wooden spoon. "You know something about this." She did not answer. The silence between them stretched, heavy and sharp. Finally, she set the spoon down and turned toward him, her expression haunted. "They have found me," she whispered. Jack felt his chest tighten. "Who?" Celine's silver eyes seemed to glow brighter in the firelight, but they carried sorrow rather than light. "I told you I was running," she said softly, "but I did not tell you from whom. I was the widow of a lord, a man of power among my kind. When he died, tradition demanded that I be given to his brother. A forced bond. A cage disguised as honor." Her voice cracked, and she clasped her hands tightly together, as though trying to hold herself steady. "I could not bear it, so I fled. I ran through forests and mountains, across rivers, hiding wherever I could. And still they hunt me. They will never stop until I am taken back, whether alive or dead." Jack's heart pounded. The truth shifted everything. She was not just a wanderer, not just a refugee of the storm. She carried the weight of an entire world behind her, and that weight had now reached his doorstep. "You should have told me," he said, his voice low. Her silver eyes shimmered, filled with regret. "Would you have let me in if I had?" Jack clenched his jaw, his mind flashing back to that midnight knock, to the woman half buried in snow, begging for warmth. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe he would have chosen the same. But the truth stuck in his throat. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for his arm. "I never wanted to bring danger to you. I hoped that perhaps the storm would hide me long enough, that I could stay until spring and then vanish, leaving nothing behind but memory. But they are here, and they will not leave without me." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, as though echoing her words. Jack looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had cooked in his kitchen, laughed at his clumsy jokes, sat beside him through long nights of silence. The woman who had pressed her hand against his chest and told him he was more than a ghost. If he turned her away now, he could save himself. He could give them what they wanted, close the door, and survive another lonely winter. That was the logical choice. But when he saw the fear in her silver eyes, and beneath that fear, the trust she had placed in him, he knew. Survival was no longer enough. Jack reached for the rifle, checking the chamber with a steady hand. "If they want you," he said, his voice hard as iron, "they will have to go through me first." Celine's breath caught, her lips parting as though to protest. But no words came. Instead, her eyes softened, filling with something that looked like both sorrow and hope. She stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "Then we fight together," she whispered. The storm outside howled again, but inside the cabin, two hearts beat with the same defiance. The first sign came at dusk. The storm had settled into a low moan across the valley, the snowflakes falling thinner, slower, as if even the sky was holding its breath. Jack stood by the window, peering through a slit in the shutter. Across the white expanse of the ridge, dark figures moved. 4 of them, cloaked in heavy armor that gleamed dully in the fading light, their steps heavy enough to crush the snow into ice. They were not human. Even from a distance, Jack could see the unnatural length of their limbs, the way their shoulders sloped like beasts bred for war. Their weapons glinted, long spears tipped with blades that hummed faintly, alive with energy. Celine stood behind him, her silver eyes wide but unflinching. She had expected this moment. Perhaps she had been waiting for it all along. "They will not parley," she said quietly. "They are bound by oath. They will take me or die trying." Jack tightened his grip on the rifle. "Then let us give them the latter." He moved quickly. He barred the door with thick beams of wood, reinforced the windows with planks pulled from the shed, and checked every round of ammunition he had left. His traps were useless now. This would not be a hunt. This would be a siege. Celine did not sit idle. She pulled a small blade from beneath her furs, its surface etched with glowing lines that pulsed like veins. Jack had not known she carried it, but when she held it, her trembling vanished. Her movements became sharp, deliberate, like a warrior slipping back into a forgotten skin. "They will come at night," she said. "They prefer darkness. They think fear grows in shadows." Jack lit every lantern he owned, setting them around the cabin until the small space glowed with golden light. "Then we will show them what fear really is." The first strike came just after nightfall. The door shuddered violently, a blow so powerful that dust rained from the rafters. Jack raised the rifle, his breath steady. Another blow followed, then another, until the wood groaned under the pressure. A sudden crash split the window to his left, shards flying as a spear pierced through. Jack swung the rifle and fired. The crack of the shot echoed through the cabin, and a figure outside fell back into the snow with a roar that was more beast than man. Celine was already moving. When another spear thrust through the broken window, she caught it with her blade, the energy sparking violently as steel clashed against alien metal. With a cry, she twisted and drove the blade upward, severing the weapon cleanly. The attacker howled in pain. The door burst inward. One of the hunters surged through, towering and armored, his silver mask reflecting the firelight. Jack fired again, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. The bullet struck the hunter's chest, staggering him but not stopping him. The creature lunged, swinging the jagged shaft of a broken spear. Jack ducked, swung the butt of his rifle into the hunter's jaw, and drove him back with raw force. The two struggled in the cramped space, knocking over chairs and scattering embers from the hearth. Celine leapt forward, her blade flashing. With a precise strike, she sliced through the creature's exposed throat. He fell, choking, his blood hissing as it touched the fire. The cabin filled with smoke, sparks, and the heavy scent of burning wood. Another figure crashed through the window, rolling into the room with a snarl. Jack swung his axe this time, the blade biting into the intruder's shoulder. The alien roared, swinging wildly, but Celine darted behind him, driving her blade into the back of his armor. Together they brought him down. Two more remained outside. Their shadows shifted against the snow, circling, waiting for weakness. Jack's chest heaved, sweat pouring despite the cold. His rifle was nearly empty. His axe dripped with dark blood. He glanced at Celine. Her blue skin was marked with scratches, her breath ragged, but her silver eyes blazed with determination. "They will not stop," she whispered. "Neither will we," Jack growled. The last two came together, storming the door with a fury that shook the cabin. The wood splintered, beams snapping as they forced their way through. Jack fired his last shot, striking one in the head. The creature fell, armor clattering against the floor. The final hunter roared, swinging a massive blade that cleaved through the table as though it were paper. Jack staggered back, gripping the axe, but his arms were heavy, his body screaming with exhaustion. The blow came fast, too fast. Celine leapt between them. Her blade clashed against the hunter's weapon, sparks erupting. With a cry that carried all the strength of her defiance, she drove her glowing dagger upward, plunging it deep beneath the hunter's chest plate. The alien roared, stumbled, and collapsed in a heap at her feet. Silence followed. A heavy, ringing silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the sound of their breathing. For hunters lay dead around them. The cabin was broken, the air thick with smoke and blood, but they still stood. Celine lowered her blade, her hands trembling once more now that the danger was done. Jack leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Their eyes met, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. They had fought together. They had survived together. And in that survival, a bond had been forged that neither storm nor blood could break. The battle left the cabin scarred. Splintered wood lay scattered across the floor. Blood stained the rug before the fire, and the shutters hung broken on their hinges. Yet despite the wreckage, the small home still stood. And within it, Jack and Celine still breathed. For a long time they said nothing. The storm outside had quieted, as if even the wilderness had been silenced by what had taken place. Jack sat heavily in his chair, his axe still in hand, his muscles trembling from exhaustion. Celine knelt by the fire, her silver eyes watching the flames as if they held the answer to some question only she could hear. Finally, Jack spoke. His voice was rough, but steady. "They are dead." Celine nodded slowly. For now, the truth of her words weighed heavy. There could be more. Others could come. Yet neither of them spoke of fear. They had faced death together and triumphed. That knowledge was enough to silence the shadows that lingered in the corners of the cabin. Jack leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Celine was looking at him. Her gaze was no longer guarded, no longer distant. It was soft, almost fragile, as if she were allowing herself to feel something she had kept hidden for far too long. "You risked your life for me," she said quietly. Jack shook his head. "I did what needed to be done." "No," she whispered. "You did more. You could have turned me away that night. You could have given me to them. But you chose to fight. Not because you had to, but because you wanted to." Her voice trembled, and for the first time, her silver eyes shimmered with tears. "You gave me freedom." The fire popped, casting sparks into the air. Jack shifted forward, resting his arms on his knees. He studied her face, the delicate lines of her blue skin, the silver of her eyes, the strength she carried despite the weight of her past. "You gave me something too," he said at last. "Before you came, I was a ghost. I thought living meant surviving one day after another, waiting for nothing. But you reminded me what it feels like to be alive, to laugh, to fight, to care." Celine's lips parted, her breath unsteady. Slowly, she reached across the small space between them and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, trembling but sure. "I made you a promise," she said softly, "that I would keep your bed warm through the winter. At first, it was only desperation. Words to keep me alive for one more night. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being a promise I owed and became one I wanted to keep. Not for survival. For you." Her confession hung in the air, delicate but unbreakable. Jack's chest tightened, his heart thundering with a force he had not felt in years. He turned his hand, closing his rough fingers gently around hers. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the fire's glow, the rhythm of their breaths, and the quiet knowledge that they were no longer two lost souls clinging to survival. They were something more. Days turned into weeks, and the winter began to loosen its grip. The snow melted slowly, rivers breaking free of their icy chains, the forest stirring with life once more. The air grew softer, touched by the first hint of spring. The cabin bore its scars, but Jack repaired it piece by piece. Celine worked beside him, her laughter carrying into the open air, her presence making the wilderness feel less like exile and more like home. The hunters never returned, though both knew the possibility lingered like a shadow beyond the trees. One evening, as the last of the snow dripped from the roof, Jack stood with Celine outside the cabin. The sky burned with the colors of sunset, gold and crimson spilling across the horizon. She leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, her silver eyes reflecting the fading light. "Spring is here," she murmured. Jack nodded. "Yes, and so are you." She smiled faintly, her fingers curling into his hand. "I said I would stay only through the winter, but my heart no longer listens to bargains. I do not want to leave." Jack turned, meeting her gaze fully. Then do not. Stay. Not because of a promise. Stay because you choose to. Her smile deepened, soft and radiant, carrying with it all the warmth of the fire that had kept them alive through the long, bitter nights. Then I choose to stay, she whispered. The sun dipped lower, painting the snow with its final light. The storm had ended. The loneliness that had once haunted Jack was gone, replaced by something stronger than survival, stronger than fear. Celine had promised to warm his bed. In the end, she had given him her heart. And Jack, once a man who lived like a ghost, had found life again. Not in solitude, but in love. Together, they stepped back into the cabin, not as strangers bound by desperation, but as two souls bound by choice. And as the first flowers of spring pushed through the last of the snow, Jack knew the winter had ended, but what they had found would remain. Forever.